C'est une bonne idée d'acheter le colored call, sovereign color. En même temps que les gens rejoignent, c'est 5 minutes encore.
Perfect. Hello, welcome everybody, and thanks for being with us today. We're more than happy to have been able to put this panel to discuss about a really vital topic as ESG. The goal today is to become aware and to understand the huge importance of setting and integrating ESG KPIs in order to have a long-term success, as well as to convey the need for these in and around the wealth management sector. I'd like to briefly introduce the members of our discussion and share some key points on their background. We are pleased to have Dr. Lilach Trabelsi, who is a managing director at TBH Global Family Office, a boutique family office based in Geneva. She's also a management scholar with a finance background. Her research aims to enhance our understanding of strategic decision making and the role of stakeholders in the area of corporate sustainability. In order to better understand how to address global grand challenges, she teaches corporate sustainability, finance, and statistic courses at the University of Geneva and Webster University. Next, we have Mr. Lanaras, CEO of Capland Family Office, who has over 40 years of experience in private banking in Geneva, investments and fund management, having worked for Republic National Banks and its successor bank HSBC, first as a relationship manager and later on as a managing director. From 2005 to 2009, seriously with founding and managing Capland SA. Mr. Lanaras was COO of the CMA Group of Companies, a fund of hedge funds that had approximately 3 billion under management across 13 funds. Mr. Lanaras received his BA and MA from Webster University of St. Louis in Geneva, and a focus on management and international relations. Last but not least, we have Mr. David Crépin, who joined KeeSystem in 2010 as a customer service and support manager, offering his expertise to this young startup at the time, while adopting of proximity, excellence, and service. Today, he's the head of sales and partner in charge of coordinating all KeeSystem projects worldwide. David is a computer engineer with a degree from the ISTY in Versailles. He's worked for Patrimony Management and Technologies, a Paris-based company specializing in asset simulation tools, as well as consulting roles for companies like Augeo Software. I'd like to let everyone know that at the end of the session, we're going to have a short Q&A. So if you guys can feel free to share your question comment section, and we'll make sure to cover as many as we can. So without further ado, let's jump on to the first question. Why is integrating ESG KPI crucial for long-term success in wealth management? We'll start with Lila and we'll have her take the lead.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So I would like to share my perspective on this question. So for me, the central premise that comes to my mind when I hear this question is that companies that cannot or will not, for whatever reason, integrate properly the environmental, social, and governance, so the ESG issues, into their business models cannot expect to be financially sustainable in the long term, and will therefore be less likely to survive. So we have this kind of double materiality approach. We have the ESG type of sustainability and financial sustainability, and they are closely intertwined. So adapting the business model to address these ESG issues, hopefully on all three fronts, rather than in silos, because the E, the S, and the G are also  that should help improve business resilience ultimately. So the idea is that there is a clear link between the understanding and the integration of ESG risks by companies and wealth managers into decision making, and the financial long-term viability of the businesses and the portfolios, and the ability to make a relatively good return over time, whatever good means. As we know, that depends also on the economic environment, on the client profile, on the expectations, etc. I would like to make what seems to me an important distinction that I thought about in relation to this question. So there is a difference between risk mitigation or the integration of ESG-related KPIs, such as having certain policies and targets in place into decision-making processes, and thinking about positive impact generation, opportunity creation, and actual impact measurement. Usually, when people talk about ESG today, they refer to the mitigation part. But of course, increasingly, companies or individuals that are perceived to be just talking without taking real action, that's not good for the reputation. And also, greenwashing is, of course, a big issue. So there's a wide range of stakeholders, including policymakers, regulators, financiers, customers, existing and potential employees, especially the younger generation, in addition to the more typical stakeholders that we use at least think about the typical stakeholders that care about sustainability, like NGOs and the media and communities. So everyone is looking more and more to see tangible action and positive impact generation. And just to further kind of stress this point about the difference between risk mitigation and opportunity creation, last December, the Swiss Federal Council published its stance on greenwashing. And there they clearly say that financial products or services that are labeled as sustainable must pursue at least one of two investment objectives in addition to financial goals. So we're in no way giving up on the financial goals or return. So either alignment with one or more specific sustainability goals or contribution to achieving one or more sustainability goals, specific sustainability goals. And what's really interesting there, that they also say that financial products and services that are aimed at reducing ESG risks or optimizing performance are considered to follow purely financial investment objectives and should not be described as sustainable, unless they also pursue one of the other goals that they mentioned. So in fact, for the Swiss Federal Council, ESG risks should be taken into account, but as part of the very basic fiduciary duties. So that's my stance on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lanaras, what's your input?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me in this conference. I'm very honored. Second, thank you to Lila. This is, I think, a very thorough explanation of where things stand. But I would like to step back and take a little bit of a different angle. I mean, the obvious question, the obvious answer, I think, to the question why integrating ESG KPIs is crucial for long-term success of wealth management is because simply it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for anyone and in everybody's mind, whether you are a youngster, whether you're a politician, an auditor, a wealth manager like me, or an investor, or an employee who has got nothing to do in a company that doesn't even have one franc. Everybody has an opinion on the subject. So how do we get there is the question. So coming from different angles, looking at it from different angles and putting it once, let's try to put ourselves in the minds of the different actors who act in order to enact what is a KPI and how it will be implemented. So the ideal impact of for wealth management is that at the end there is a real social impact. If it is for governance, it has to do with governance and sustainability. And for the environment, the answer is obvious: is preserve the environment for future generations. So, in order to get there, if we could get there, we would also achieve another thing that it is paramount that I haven't read yet in the various ESG related articles, which is whether it is any corporation that acts in its own field, whether it's an industry, a service company, whatever, employee satisfaction through the corporate positive impact and their participation in the positive impact. Now, all these two things, because if everybody has in his mindset that it's the right thing to do, and everybody and the actors are all in a satisfaction mood, then we can achieve long-term prosperity for any institution. But now the question has a twofold angle, because one can say, are we talking about the success of the investor in wealth management? The answer is yes, in the long term for sure. But are we talking for the success of the wealth management companies themselves? The answer is also yes. So there's a twofold angle to this first question. And how do we get there? Well, there we have to, I think there's three things that need to be done. Is to be set, very clear criteria must be set. At least the criteria must all be majority agreed by each and every individual industry. I repeat, each and individual industry, because it is not exactly the same when we speak very generically and we have the European Securities and Markets Authority, who is the lead on that for the moment in this field that concerns ESG, and also, and most importantly, in my opinion, by the right and competent people with enough experience to set these KPIs. And we will come back to this on point 3. So, in short, this is my add-on to what Lilach had to say, which was very thorough.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. So we're going to jump to our second question, which is, what specific KPIs should wealth managers focus on to drive growth? So we're going to go, Lilach, and take it with you.
Okay, so there was already a bit of a hint to where I also want to go in my answer to this question in the previous in the answer that was just given. So I wish I had a clear-cut answer to this question, but I don't know if anyone does. So this still remains quite a tricky question, but doesn't mean we cannot say anything. So one thing we can say is that the general approach out there right now seems to be that there should be some KPIs that are relevant to all types of businesses and are therefore relevant to all industries, and those should be reported by everyone. For the moment, this includes, for example, indicators related to emissions, such as the scope 1, 2, and 3. However, as just mentioned, since different industries do function differently, some core ESG issues are likely to be different depending on the industry that the company that is being analyzed belongs to, and those need to be taken into account. So if we think about some examples, just to make it a bit clearer, if we know that well-being and respect of communities, for example, is something that is very, very important when we look at the mining industry. If we look at agriculture or any other very labor-intensive industry, there are many potential concerns related to human rights, such as having fair wage, living income, child labor issues that can arise, and also health and safety concerns that can arise if we think about agriculture, for example, because of the use of pesticides. The energy industry, on the other hand, is mainly considered to be the most polluting industry. So that's a core problem there. So context is very important. We probably know, many of you probably know SASB. That is one body that has analyzed different industries and highlighted a list of issues that they consider to be particularly relevant for every industry. But that's at the industry level. And then if we go to the company level, as I mentioned, that's also important. So we need to analyze more specifically companies' operations, where they are located. Ideally, if we can get a view of the entire supply chain, That's great. That is still very difficult to do in many cases. So also local contexts should be taken into account, along with other more, let's say, basic elements of the company, such as the size of the company, because that also affects how much power it has, or the range of locations it operates in or has an impact on. So this is not always the same thing. Just as a quick side note, there are increasing efforts being made to better integrate the social part, so the social concerns, into regulation and decision making, including an increasing focus on this not so easy to obtain transparency along the supply chain through supply chain due diligence. Even though historically it's true that there has been a greater focus on the environmental side, and many believe that this was because it's easier to define some of the issues and measure some of the environmental concerns, whereas with social, it's not as clear cut.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Lanaras, what are these specific KPIs that we should focus on? Opinion.
Well, ESG, environment, sustainability, governance again. So if we go to environment, depending on industry and the sector, I think the KPI measures should be based and be extremely limited in number. That's personal opinion number one, because in order to implement something and come to agreement in a very large and touch the largest possible number of corporations in their day-to-day management and of operations and reporting and transparency, as Lilach just explained, I think the number must be extremely limited. And my suggestion is five. Five because we have 5 fingers. It's not more intelligent than that. Huh? So one should be concentrated on emissions with a certain degree. Companies who are in, for example, production and transport, travel, and mining, that Lilach just mentioned, can have a pretty much similar type of an agreeable, simplified measure of emissions, and with a limited number. It should never exceed 5, and be concentrated in 5. So it's a 5 times 5. So if we go to waste management, which is I think the second sector that is very important, where we can all do a lot of economies of in order to protect the environment, and we can do sometimes very simple things. For example, in Capland, one of the things we decided to do is everybody has his own box, a lunch box, because everybody who goes out to lunch and comes back, like myself, to have lunch in front of the Bloomberg screens. Instead of buying all these paper boxes and plastic boxes that everybody's consuming, you just go with your box, you clean it after you fill it in at the shop, you come back with the same box, you just clean it, takes 1 minute, 30. I've timed myself. So that's one thing. And then we have energy consumption, and also paper, of course, not print too much now. Thank God we have the blockchain technology coming up, and there all companies can, especially on documentation, can be everything. All documents are blockchainably transformed in a system that allows for a conservation without having paper and without wasting paper and having space. So it's a good economy to save volume and rental volume for all companies. Now, if we go quickly to energy consumption and economy achievements, each company has its own rules, because this a wealth management company, all you can do is turn off the lights, turn off the computers as quickly as possible, and not leave them on, and things like that. Now, can you imagine Tesla that is producing all these batteries? What energy consumption can they do? Each company and each industry must decide on its energy consumption and economy achievements, which could be technically and measurable. Then we go to water-related consumption, treatment, and also here it's an add-on because we can reduce plastic in daily consumption under the waste management chapter. We can also, it's paramount for water, because a lot of plastic ends up in the oceans, as we all know. So water-related consumption by companies, this is possible to measure as well. So that's for the environment. If we go quickly to sustainability, there the definition of sustainability is not very clear, at least not to myself, and I don't think to all the think tanks and all the current people who have since 2007, 8, started 2005 or 6, when the first time we heard about governance and sustainability and environment protection. So there I would also say 5. First is make sure that everybody analyzes what is and sets long-term targets and informs the public of what are his own targets, long-term targets, which is simple long-term planning. Then one must clarify what are his processes. That's point number 2, in order to achieve, and how he's going to achieve the target setting. And this one can be public. Third is an analysis, and in this analysis is to make sure that there is a plan for 10, 15, 20, and 30 years. So we're talking about really long-term planning. And this we never see in general assemblies or in management reports. Everybody speaks about every quarter and what will happen next quarter. And what CEOs and chairmen of corporations, when they come out, they only provide insights on the next year, the next 12 months, because it's very short-sighted, in fact. So what I'm proposing is to have a very long-sighted view. And then another point that I think is paramount is to see what corporations and each one does on education, because I think all of this can be improved through education. Lila is a professor, and I'm sure she's an example of what I mean, what we mean by involve each corporation. How do they train their employees? And this is also can be public information, and also companies that can share their knowledge. Sharing knowledge for the long is key. If there's transparency on what people know and it's published, because there's so much talent in so many thousands of corporations that we invest in, but we don't, the real talent doesn't express itself, because the real talent doesn't have the time, because it's the most talented are doing the work and seldom have the time to come out in media or write papers about these very, very important factors that will achieve the ultimate goal, which is the right thing to do, what we said in question 1. And then once these 4 points, then if each industry should define what is the common sustainable goal for each industry and state it. Say it, put it out loud that we have agreed as a team, as maybe insurance companies, banks, but what goal for each one? And this is where one could measure because we're talking about setting KPIs. So for sustainability, this is something that, of course, in the real estate sector, we can give hundreds of examples. Sustainability, because the building must be sustainable, a company must be sustainable, and so on. Quickly on the governance. I think governance things have evolved very positively in the last, let's say, last 20 years, because equality has picked up drastically, whether it's for gender, race, or other religious matters, etc. So this is in the right direction. So this could be measurable on the number of people employed, etc. But the respect of individual rules and regulations. This is measurable, because if a company is not fined, if the employees of the company do not break the law and are not fined and have, let's say, have not violated the law, this is all traceable and technically could be measurable. So respect of law, respect of best practices is the chapter. Now one can define it as one which is best. Then on governance is transparency. Lila mentioned it twice in her presentation, and I think transparency is key. This is by being transparent on the process, for example, of production, by being on the origin of products, and then transparency of the methodology, salaries of employees, where they are located, if they're healthy, how many times they fall sick. These are measurable things, and these can be. If we're all informed, then we can make better decisions to invest or not in the related company. Then I have 2 more, which are a bit more personal, which are discipline and perseverance. I think that this is how do you define discipline is by when employees in companies have not broken the law. And how many companies, for example, if we take Credit Suisse, unfortunately, we had 9 occasions in the last 8 years of employees breaking the law, so they're not disciplined. Then another way of finding discipline is people work hours in the office. Are people present or not present? And then perseverance also is if you have you can measure by how many years employees spend in the company.
Okay.
Simple things, but not so. That's for governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just a quick note. I'd like to remind those of you who jumped in a little late that we'll be more than happy to, have your comments, and also any kind of questions that you guys have coming from the audience, then within the comment section, and we'll be discussing them and going through them during our Q&A at the end. Why don't we go to our third question, which is, who should develop the indicators, performance measures, and principles to be implemented? This is a very good one. Who wants to start?
Well, I think it was scheduled that I start, if you don't mind. So
Of course.
I'll take the word. So, fine. So only yesterday in Bloomberg there was a huge article on the European Securities and Markets Authority stepping a little bit back, Swiss authority stepping back, because there's so much confusion in the fund industry, as you've all heard. I presume recently BlackRock and the Association of Managements in the US and Europe has said, guys, step back, we don't understand, it's not clear, let's get that together. So starting from that, who should? So I think we give you a couple of hints earlier. I think I'll start with who shouldn't. Those who shouldn't for the moment, because there's a lot of work that has been done in an introductory form, is politicians and everybody who is elected, auditors that are in the audit business. I'll come back why they should not be involved in the next phase, and anything that is looks like a think tank or has to do with journalism or any other form. Why? Because they've done already a very good substantial. So much has been written, which is this is a good basis for all the CEOs of companies and the boards of companies to do the work. I think each industry, in order to apply it properly, each industry must select a very small and recognized, experienced team of members among its peers, and then set very simple rules on the 3 subjects and measurable rules. Already some exist as like that. Explain, obviously. And the others, I think each industry should be allowed to decide on their own. Why politicians, auditors, and NGOs? Because until now, what we've heard is in the last 20 years, we've heard, for us, for wealth managers and investors, anything that has to do with military, whoa, guys, don't touch. Nuclear, my goodness, don't even think about nuclear. It's very dangerous. It's not good for. Now, I'll go first to the military. Now, I think there's a realization because politicians have realized, and politicians will be the biggest military spenders in Europe and the US over the next 6 years. 2 trillion have been announced in investments in military spending, arms, guns, bombs, whatever you name it. Obviously, ideally, we don't want to do that. But all these think tanks and everybody who's been thinking and writing on ESG forgot a key factor, the number 1 factor, in my opinion, which is life. How do you save life when we live in a bipolar world with dictatorships and democracies? If democracies don't stand up to fight because we're very complacent about our lives and our standard of living, going out, having holidays, and now in France even having the right, they're going for a law to allow people to do nothing, which is the extreme thing that I've ever heard in my life. So if you have this type of attitude, and the big mistake, in my opinion, is that people have just put aside the fact that Russia collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, and and the world collapse doesn't mean that we're all going to make love and be with each other and we love each other. No, no way. There's two big systems now with Xi Jinping and the dictators as the leader, Erdogan coming maybe third place, and the mullah in Iran fourth place. So all these, for as long as there are dictatorships in the planet, there's a lot of wishful thinking in trying to apply a certain number of things that could be applied only by 1 billion out of 7 billion in the planet. Because between Europe, US, we're talking about 1 billion. If we go, how about Africa? I want to see all of us now go to Chad, for example, or Ethiopia, and try to implement ESG practices. Do you think it's feasible? So in order to get there, so let's go a step back. I think politicians and all auditors should not participate, because if the day we apply, we push the button and we say all KPIs are in place, auditors would make money from this. Because, and why I'm saying very few, only 5 for each, because imagine that auditors have, if we leave the auditors were allowed, if I were in the place, if I was an auditor, I would ask for 300,000 KPIs. So I can spend 3 months to check on each company. Can you imagine how much work and how much money I would make? Mm-hmm. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but this is not the case. So by stepping back, I think in each industry you can easily designate a number. It won't be very easy, but I think that's the first step. Then allow them to set the principles. They must be uniform, they must be clear, and they must be measurable. Lila, any thoughts?
Okay, yes, I do. I agree with a lot of the things. Thank you for being brave to say some of the things that you said. Brave enough to say some of the things. I tend to agree. I see value in the bottom-up approach for sure. So bottom-up meaning we, as you said, you mentioned like the ability to implement things. So it's not enough for, as you say, policymakers, regulators to sit amongst themselves and then say, this is what we want to see, because sometimes it's not feasible. So there needs to be input, clear input from like the field. So companies should say what they can provide now. So what kind of data they can provide now. We know that we are missing data. We are missing data in general. We are missing good quality data. We are missing data that can be compared so that we can compare between companies and we can compare between industries. So we need to know what they can do now. We need to know what they need in order to provide additional information. What does the finance sector need in order to properly analyze the companies? And as you said, what can be implemented successfully ultimately? And these are issues that have arisen in recent years in response to some regulation. At the same time, I do see the value of having some top-down, because it seems that while voluntary frameworks are nice, and there are many, many, many of them, which is a different problem, and some companies do adhere to them, when you have the mandatory regulation, then the adoption is faster. But of course, as you already said, it has to be, the regulation needs to be such that it also makes sense.
Yes. If I can jump on what you said, it's very important. The fact that they've done a lot of work has been achieved. There's a lot of, so the guidelines, the overall, already the fact that we have environment, sustainability, and governance, they sound to each CEO, each investor, each person on the planet, they sound reasonable. There's a lot of, let's say, thing that was a lot of top-down that was already done. Now I think it is the time to set guidelines, say, okay, guys, each industry, because there are associations do exist, for the banks, for the asset managers. For us, at least it exists now. For agricultural industry, it exists. For industry, it exists. There are associations everywhere. So I think it is feasible now to give them the mandate and a little bit of at some time. I'm not saying to give them 5 years or 3 years, but a reasonable amount of time for them to come back with proposals, which can then be validated by the legislator. But now I think it's time to make a small step back and get the feedback from the people who are the real scientists. For example, you have Ducasse, which is a chef, for example. He doesn't have the time to think about all these things, but he applies them. When he goes out, he has his own gardens, he has his own gardens. So you go to a hotel, there are hotels now that if they have a very large resort, they produce their own potatoes, their own tomato salads and everything. They don't, and they have policies where they don't buy anything that has a distance produced 20 kilometers further out. There's thousands of good examples already applied in the system, but simply it's not known. So once it is known, once CEOs, let's say, not only CEOs, I mean, corporations are called in to say, guys, tell us what you've done, what you're doing, what you're giving your principles, then it will be much more easy. It will be much easier for, let's say, the legislator to come and say, okay, this is reasonable and feasible. If you say it's feasible, then we can apply it.
Thank you. So I think it's vital and super important to understand the fact that technology plays a really big part in all this, in applying it and keeping it. So how can wealth managers and CEO leaders, how can they, also comply and kind of be easier to adapt all these aspects? So I'm gonna go move into our fourth question, which is mostly targeted to David, who oversees the technical aspect of the solution that KeeSystem team has implemented into the KeeSense software. What are these possibilities through portfolio management systems, also known as PMS, to monitor its portfolios from an ESG perspective?
Yes, there are several possibilities to monitor ESG in a PMS, so into KeeSense. The first possibility is to define on our criteria to determine the ESG rating per individual asset. For instance, ESG criteria respected, sustainability criteria, or impact investment active. We can then determine an ESG profile of a portfolio. The asset manager and then either responsible for defining the minimum and maximum exposure level for each asset class, and or their client. The tool have the capacity to generate alerts if the ESG profile is not aligned with the recommendation made by the asset manager and or the client. Another way is to define an ESG rating per individual asset. Another solution is to retrieve automatically this data provider. This can be a global rating of an asset concern, or we can enter more in details with different rating. For example, rating based on the company following the environment, labor, social aspect, governance, and rating based on the industry concern. I have mentioned before that we have different possibilities. The second possibility to monitor ESG is based on API with a provider of investment analytics. And we give you some example. First, portfolio position and or transparency of your fund, we are sent automatically to the provider. KeeSense can then display the following information, like identifier the proportion of the portfolio involved in dirty and green industry. Evaluate your portfolio ESG risk. Evaluate portfolio carbon footprint. I can make another example. Based on the information per asset received by the provider, it can refresh twice per week, for example. KeeSense can provide an accurate analysis on ESG rating and its industrial sector, breakdown in the percentage of critical products, And there is even the option to provide a PDF with a comparison of the overall ESG rating against other assets in the same industry. So, in conclusion, through system and dedicated profile ESG, we are able to provide asset level indicator or ESG impact on portfolios. So enabling to asset manager, relation manager to assess our sustainability criteria are into account in a product decision. So let me say, with KeeSense, you can do your business your own way. Thank you. Thank you, Umar.
Perfect. Wonderful. So with this, we conclude the questions for the panel, and we quickly pass on to the Q&A from everyone who have joined us today. So we see that we question from the audience. As an asset manager, in order to avoid greenwashing, is it sufficient to do exclusion based on, for example, MSCI ESG rating, or is further data-specific analysis needed? I'll let you guys.
Well, the short answer is depends on where you operate from as an asset manager. Different rules for the moment apply. There's a total cacophony. Imagine for example, you're in Moscow. It's not exactly the same as if you're in Paris or in New York. No, so the answer is the simple answer is do it the simplest way you think is best. And exclusion is the easiest for the moment, and anyhow there is for the moment everybody's stepping back. I sense that there is a huge stepping back from authorities in order to make clarifications between category 8, category 9, and all this mishap that is taking place now. So for the moment, I wouldn't worry much about it, but I would make the analysis, continue doing the necessary analysis in order to get ready for what is going to come. In order to avoid greenwashing, yes, I think it's the simplest answer is yes.
Can I just add
Absolutely.
something? So there are different approaches to invest in a more sustainable way. Exclusion is one of the more, shall we say, basic ones. But one thing to be mindful of, I would say, is that there are 5 or 6 big rating agencies that we commonly hear about, MSCI being one of them. There have been studies that show that the correlation between the different ratings are quite low. So if you look at one, a company can have an excellent rating, and if you look at another one, it can have a not so good rating. So depending on one rating, that limit also your ability to let's say do a good analysis. I would say if you can, and of course that depends on also the size of the asset manager and the abilities and the resources. If you can find information from more than one data source or data provider, that's better, and then you can kind of make your own final judgment. Google can also help, although I know that some data providers, they have integrated a controversies part as well. So not just what the company says it does, but also what others say about it. And that's very important to try to have this double view of not just what the company tells you or tells the public, but also what kind of wrongdoing has come up in the media, etc. Because they don't always do what they say. So having this double approach or view, I think, is important. And then, as I said, this is one way. And then, of course, if you really want to get the kind of the better view about the company, that's when we talk about company engagement, and that's when you actually go and you talk to the people in the company. But that's a different step, and of course the smaller asset managers would have a harder time doing that.
Okay, thank you. We also have one directly. What are the steps to start integrating I know that there's a lot of the main and essential steps to start integrating ESG KPIs into our investment strategy.
Well, very simple and to the point. You have to be as simplistic as possible and start defining your own environment, sustainability, and governance. What you think, and depending if you're an asset manager or an investor, and set a certain number of goals. And then once you visit and make the analysis on a dedicated company, there's already enough information around already, which gives you hints on the ones that are doing things or are willing to do things. And so you can already start and pre-select companies. In examples, for example, 2 oil companies. You know, one oil company that it is based maybe in a country that has 0 ESG related rules and regulations, and one that is already applying and has announced that a couple of $100 billion of investments on alternative green energy investments. It's simple. This is a very simple example. And then once they become low, which I think will take 1 or 2 years more for things to become the norm that comes from top down, as Lilach said, you have enough time to start preparing it and go to the right direction.
Okay, perfect. I think we just received another one. Okay, so with all these rankings and criteria, we are not running the risk that you punish the ones that are willing to improve rather than just rewarding the ones that are already there. Often the best investment are those companies that can be rated over the ones that are already there, which is essential in wealth managers want to generate investor returns. I would say that this is more a comment. And is there anything that you guys want to? Yeah, I can see. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, and thank you for making that point, because what we want to do, I mean, the companies who are doing well, great, wonderful, they're already there. Let's say that there are some out there, but what we really want to do, and especially as the financiers, we want to help the transition towards sustainability of those companies who are willing to go through the transition. So what we shouldn't be doing probably is penalizing those that are maybe not yet there, but are willing to make the effort. And that's where probably if you have direct engagement with company, this is something that you can pick up more easily than if you're on the outside. But also when you look, if we go back to those ratings, if you can also look at the ratings over time, you can try to understand if the company is stagnant, if it's been improving, maybe it's improving on the E, it's not doing so well on the S, etc. So I think it's a really good, important point that was made, that we really need to consider the past, the present, and also the future of the company. And then, you know, if the company says in 2-3 years this is where I want to be, then it's possible to try to help this company, but then go back in the future, go back and see, has the company accomplished what it has set out to accomplish? And this is, I know some banks are functioning like this as well. For example, when they provide credit, they're willing to work, to engage with the companies, essentially.
Very valid point. And the problem is that we have, I think, the financial world, which is much more interlinked with what is going on in the wealth management sector, and banks were much more in advance in the application of these KPIs than in understanding them and thinking about them. A lot of industries and companies have not done the homework yet. They're getting there. Of course, they've all heard about it, but now, as Lilach said, you need to have time, and it's the good answer to the questions, as Lilach said, is once they're applied, then over time you will be able to see who are the ones who are willing. They're not there yet, but and these, as Lilach said, yes, they must be also favored equally as the ones that are there as well. Is in my opinion, the right answer.
Yeah, Thank you very much, Ludwig. Thank you, Ludwig, for the question. We have time to take one last one. So I think this one, which is also goes into the direction of how do we do it, and it's for, I think, David. How do we aggregate and consolidate all our data? To walk us on the things and the tools that we can use.
Yes, how we aggregate and consolidate all your data. We saw there is different way to consolidate your data interface with different custodian bank. We can aggregate data from data providers that I have mentioned before, because we can retrieve all the information regarding the asset. We have the possibility to have an interface with API with different tools to integrate all the different data. You can consolidate all this information in the same format, in the same place.
That's good. Good. I want to give a big thank you to all of you, to our panel members, for sharing such a valuable insight and for being part of the session. I would also like to thank the audience for taking the time to be with us this morning, and your interest in such a dominant subject that I think that we should all keep on top of the agenda. I guess that you guys all agree with me. Other questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out directly. Again, thank you, everyone. I wish everyone a great day, and until the very next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.